So the Model 5 KLH speakers are finally back. And yes, I am ready to give you my take on the speakers. It's been somewhere. I've done something very interesting with those, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, to describe the speaker, I have searched far and wide in the English dictionary to find the suitable word that would describe and embody this speaker. And I could not find a word that would do that in English. So I resorted to my mother language, Korean, and I found a suitable word that described this speaker to almost perfection. And it is called DEBAK. And if you clicked on this video, then you probably saw the English form of this word, DEBAK. Now, if you translate this in Google Translate, then it translates to something along the lines of amazing, OMG, oh my god, along those lines. But that doesn't quite describe it to its fullest of what this DEBAK means. So from a native speaker, kind of, let me give you an education in the Korean language. It means so fucking good. And for my weeb brothers out there that still didn't get it, 本当にすごいです. But that's the extent of my language ability. KLH Model 5s, let's go. So here's a crazy story, right? Sean from Zero Fidelity, for those of you that don't know, he has his own channel, he's a great friend of mine. But one thing about him is that I usually agree with him on a lot of things about sound, how things sound. You know, his assessments are pretty spot on. So coming from a guy that I trust in his assessment of sound, he calls me up one day and he goes, "Hey Jay, I'm having a blast with this speaker. I found something truly special." And I'm thinking to myself, this guy is a type of guy, if you don't know, on the phone, when I ask him about a certain speaker, he goes negative, positive. He's very mechanical. He doesn't have like, oh, it gives me emotional connections, none of that. But with this speaker, he was like, oh, I'm having a blast. Man, this speaker is so special. I'm actually having fun for the first time in a long time. And that got me intrigued. But I know for a fact that, you know, everyone's different. What he may enjoy may not be the same for me. So I said, okay, right, maybe I'll review it later on. And then he says, no, you're not. You're reviewing it right now because I'm contacting the KLH guys to send it right over to you. And you're going to listen to it and tell me what you think. Sean, that guy. So I get these speakers in, whether I like it or not. And first look, I'm just like, looks like really like my JBL L100 speakers, 4311s, kind of vintage vibe going on, right? That retro look. It's a three-way design. It has a tweeter, mid-range, and a woofer. And it's a sealed acoustic suspension design. So it doesn't have any ports or anything like that. And because it doesn't have any ports, I expected fully of having almost no bass or having very little sub-extension. But we'll talk about that in a minute. And by this time, practically everyone on YouTube has either already reviewed it or heard it. So I'm thinking to myself, well, there's no point in me doing a review now. Maybe I'll just give them my feedback or something, or do something, you know, entirely different. And so I did. I got these speakers measured. Now, it's very important to note here that I didn't get them measured because I thought these would measure fantastically. In fact, I thought they would measure a little bit funky maybe, because these are colored. Because every other reviewer has said this speaker is colored. It falls in the fun zone of speakers, not the neutral reference, you know, flat sounding speakers. These fall under the fun category, like JBLs, clips, you know, something with character. So I listened to them, and my first impression was the same. It was like, yep, these are colored. These have something about them that makes them sound fun. So I wanted to measure them and perhaps dissect what that fun factor may be, you know? So I thought it would be interesting, so I sent them off to the NRC. Now, if you don't know, NRC is this anechoic chambers, an actual lab in Canada, and they have big, foam sticking out where they can measure speakers professionally. And the results were just mind-blowing. So I called them up and they're like, yes, we finally got the measurements. And Jade, you know what? These measure fantastically. And I said, oh, great. Wait, what? I was confused. They told me that the speakers measure flat, and yes, the measurements will be posted soon in the descriptions below when Soundstage posts it. But anyways, the whole point is that these measure flat. These measure neutral as they can be. Not only that, but their specs are pretty accurate, meaning whatever they put on their website in terms of speaker sensitivity, their impedance ratings and all that is pretty accurate. Which most of you are probably thinking, yeah, of course, Jay, it better be accurate or they're lying. But most companies don't, they overemphasize it or they don't lie about it. But, most cases they kind of measure it wrong on their end. But this is straight from a lab, an anechoic chamber, and their measurements are pretty darn accurate, which is one of the first companies I've ever seen that happen before. All I have to say to that is RESPECT, respect. Now the story doesn't end there. Now after I got these speakers back, I was like, oof, so good. And then I thought to myself, how can this possibly measure neutral? There's no way. So I keep thinking to myself, there has to be a factor here that I'm missing. So I contact Doug and I asked him, hey, how did you measure these speakers? Did you measure them on their stands or did you measure them straight on? Because the stands have a little bit of a angle to them. And he said, we measured them straight on. We didn't use the stands. And that's where it got me. I was like, oh, that's why. Because these speakers, when I put them on a straight stand, for example, the Wharfdale stands that I tried, it sounds not what they're supposed to be. It doesn't sound colored. In fact, it sounds like kind of neutral, kind of boring, kind of, how do I put it? Unimpressive. And so maybe that's a factor. It's a big assumption to make, but I think that's a factor, the stand. So the point I want to get across to you here is that get the stands. So you have to use the stands. Big whoop. That's what you found with your measurements, Jay? Well, no, not only that. Like I said, these measure fantastically well. That also means they measure fantastically well on their off-axis response. So what does that mean, off-axis response? Well, that means it's not on-axis. Meaning not only do the speakers sound great when you're sitting right between the speakers in your seat, but when you're off to the side, let's say your friend or yourself, let's say you're walking around in the room, they're still gonna sound great as if you are sitting in the sweet spot. That's what off-axis response means. Now, I also found that off-axis response, great ones, tends to give you really good soundstage. And that's what I found with these speakers, and that's where I want to start. These speakers, the way they freaking soundstage is phenomenal. They soundstage like almost as if they're a horn design. They soundstage so darn well, not just in 2-dimensional space, but in 3 dimensions. Meaning, I actually hear stuff like here behind me, right beside me, and it's crazy. Here's a track example. So way down, yellow. This track, if you hear it, try it out. Amazing track. You hear things really crazy going on. One of the things that I've heard with this speaker is things like bells behind me. It gave me goosebumps, really. I don't hear this with my $10,000 Electromotor 3s. I don't hear this with a lot of speakers. It's this speaker that gives this 3-dimensional sound because of their great off-axis response. Now, I do want to mention that this is an experience that I had not with just this track, but almost every other track that I've tried, and many tracks. as long as the recording has that kind of spatial cues, it will show, and it's a freaking experience. I attempted, I shouldn't have, I'm sorry. But way down, the track that I just mentioned has this deep voices, male voices, and the imaging is dead center, and you can hear imaging spectacularly down in the middle. I wouldn't say it's like as good as dual concentric designs. It's not as pinpoint down in the middle, but I mean, it's pinpoint down in the middle. How focused do you want it? It's pretty darn focused. I don't think I want it better than these, quite frankly, with imaging. Because the side imaging, the rest of the imaging within the soundstage, the little components, like I said, in the three-dimensional space, is portrayed amazingly well. You can pinpoint it, you can draw it. It is just absolutely to die for. In fact, when it comes to three-dimensional sound staging with tube amplifiers or with horn speakers, for example, that I talk about, I always say the pinpoint imaging is a sacrifice, and it is not always there with every single speakers, especially in the $2,000 price bracket. With this speaker, it is dead on, as focused as I want it to be. It's quite freakish, really. Now moving on to the frequencies. Okay, so mid-range, that's where we have to start, because the mid-range is the one that's DEBAK. It has a fine balance. It is not thin sounding, but it's not so full-bodied sounding that it becomes mushy or too bloated. It just integrates so well with the bass, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the mid-range tone, I would say, is closer to totem speakers that I love so much. Yes, in a $2,000 speaker. I've never said this before. The tone on these speakers, a $2,000 speaker is close to $4,000, $5,000 speakers like the Totem Tribe Towers or even the Metal version 2s. Now, it's not exactly the same. It is similar to the Sonos Faber Electamotor as well. I said in my first impression video that if the Sonos Faber Electamotor 3s and the Totem Tribe Towers had a baby, then these would be the monsters that would come out. So what does that all mean? So the Sonos Electamotor 3s are speakers that I find not the most accurate in tone, but pleasing because of its a little bit more mid-bass hump or mid-bass emphasis that gives a little bit more girthy, muscular sound in the mid-range region. With the Totems, it's more accurate but slightly lean sounding, and you can hear all the string instruments and so on. Well, the KLH, to me, is like the hybrid of that. It's like right in between. It's almost like the best of both worlds. It's almost like taking a little bit of that Sonos Faber magic in the mid-bass region and then adding it just a little bit to the Totems. And that's what you get with these speakers in terms of string, tonality, detail, resolution in the mid-range, the vocals, the projections. Everything is so damn spot on. It's realistic. At the same time, it is just so pleasing to the ears. Now, a track that comes to mind is Light My Fire. Now, this is a crazy track that has a lot of strings and just crazy strings. Now, this track, you can hear like everything goes. You hear every nuance of that guitar. It's just so good. Baby, light my fire. Yeah, this speaker definitely lights my fire, by far. I've non-stop raved about this speaker on my Patreon to my friends, and everyone that I've introduced this speaker to, they've heard it and they are just like, in fact, one of my Patreons asked me the other day, they can't possibly be better than the Metal version 2s or the Totem Tribe Towers or the Sonos Faber Electamotor 3s that I planned to buy. That may change. Look, it's my journey too. I don't know everything. I haven't heard everything. Plans change. Now this speaker just happens to be one of those speakers that I just can't. Look, all I'm going to say is if you put this speaker and blinded me and 10 other people and A-B'd it with $10,000, $20,000 speakers, I don't give a damn. The mid-range on these are going to be damn competitive. It is a mid-range heaven of a speaker. It is just a fine balance of articulation. It has edge. It's not so smooth that the edge is just destroyed. It has edge to the sound. It has body to the sound. And it's a perfect baby made in heaven. Edge of the totem tribe towers and body of the Electamotor 3s. What more can I ask? Especially in a speaker that costs $2,000. Now the next track that I want to introduce to you is I Drink. Now this track, the vocals are just husky, just beautiful. I love this track. And I'm gonna be honest, I drank. I will drink whatever she's having. I drank after, and I don't even drink after listening to these speakers, because these speakers make me humble. They humble me, and I guarantee you that these speakers will humble any audiophile that thinks that they need a $10,000 speaker like myself. I said it. These speakers, don't put a price on it. These speakers, the sound is not something that you can put a price on, in my opinion. Going back to the track that we're talking about, I Drink. Now, the mid-range, the tone, the huskiness in the voice, I can almost hear her vocal cords. It's just freakish. Not only do I feel the presence of the singer in the room, but I hear every nuance of it. It's almost freakish. It is so enjoyable. It is almost like you're at a concert or at a performance, but not just a concert hall, but like a personal performance. Because the way these project, the way these throw the sound stage, the way they throw the imaging is just as if you're in a personal space with the singer. Not in a concert, not in a grand hall, but intimate enough in your space, and it's three-dimensional in your space. It doesn't stretch out of the room, but it envelopes you in like a 3D like orb of some sort. It is freakish. Like I said, maybe that's the word I was looking for in English all along. Freakish, not DEBAK. Freakish. Mid-range is good, and I say mid-range is most of what we listen to is the mid-range. It's like 80-90% of what we listen to is in the mid-range frequency domain. But when it comes to the high frequency, it has to get it right for us to really enjoy the rest of the music. Freakish. The high frequency is in perfect alignment, I should say, with the mid-range. The high frequency sparkles, but just enough. It sparkles just enough. And guess what? It may sparkle just enough for me, but it may be a little bit bright for you. Port at the back, but they have this. So on the back of the speakers, you have not a port, but a adjustment for the mid and high frequency. Now this works a little bit differently than normal ones, so attention please. So how this works is when you're at high, that is where it's supposed to be. It's like the neutral line, the starting point, if you so will. And then if you want less high frequency emphasis, then you dial it down to mid or even low. So there's two steps of adjustment, attenuation for you to mess around with here. So for me, I usually have it in the mid, the center. But I found it that on certain tracks, I would have it on the high, and on certain tracks, I'll dial it back to the low. And so, for example, like I said, the track I Drink, sometimes on loud volumes, if you play loud, then you want to dial it back to low, because I found that mid or high would kind of have those edges when the track of the high frequency, just a little bit too much in the high frequencies, gets a little bit bright. But on some tracks, for example, I Can't Make You Love Me, which KLH, you can make me love them very much. But these speakers will project this track with warmth and body that is just surrounding. Just a heck of a body, I should say. And on this track, it's recorded in such a way that it has this type of body and beautiful projection of sound. So with this kind of track, I want to dial it up to high or even medium, around there, depending on my mood, to have the high frequency a little bit more projected, a little bit more balanced with the body. And that gives me a tone of the voice and the overall presence just to die for. Now bass. Bass is important. Now on this speaker, even though it's a sealed speaker when it comes to placement, it is not that sensitive, but if you want a little bit more bass, then you can move it to the wall a little bit more. Now, I found that, 1 foot off the wall behind it is good enough, and it gives you a very good balance between bass authority and sub-bass extension. Now, this speaker is not like the Bocard S400, for example, that has this big, mid-range, mid-bass emphasis that gives you like immediate like tower-like punch and dynamic. No, it's more of a linear bass. And initially when you hear it, you may be like, the bass, it's not there. But it's there. It's there. When you listen to the speaker long enough, you become to appreciate the amount of bass it has. Not only in the mid-bass region and the punch, which by the way is very tight and rounded. It's not the fastest bass, but it's enough. It's just enough. When it comes to the extension though, you may want to add a subwoofer if you are a bass head or someone who wants a lot of bass like my friend Tujin. But overall, this has a very linear, very clean extension in the sub-bass region, which makes this speaker almost not rumble the house, but make you feel it in the chest and your body on certain tracks that has that amount of bass. It is certainly capable of delivering satisfying enough bass, but if not, you can always add a subwoofer because, like I said, mid-range and high frequency is the most important thing that a speaker needs to get right. But I'm almost certain that for most people that the bass this speaker delivers will be very surprising because it certainly was surprising to me. And to be honest, the bass is a bit of a wow factor considering that this is a sealed speaker and you look at the speaker and the drivers and you're like, okay, the bass is not gonna be but it has bass. It has loads of bass. And if you're coming from a bookshelf speaker or a stand mount speaker, this speaker is gonna blow your socks off because the scale of sound, of how big it sounds, it defies how it looks. Okay, so it looks like it's not going to be that big of a sound, but to me, this speaker sounds enormous. It sounds big, and if you put a bigger speaker in front of it with curtains in front of it and gave me that demo, I would probably think the bigger speakers are the ones that's playing, quite frankly, because these speakers project sound and have the authority in the bass and the mid-range tone that's able to play loud and clear to a point where I think that these speakers should be, in theory, bigger than its physical size suggests. So these speakers are fantastic, and DEBAK, whatever word you want to put to it, this speaker for $2,000, not just because it's $2,000, that's just the added cherry on the top. This speaker, if you showed it to me and said, that it's $10,000, I would say, well, the looks are not there, but the sound, I get why. But for $2,000, these speakers are better than my Sonos Fabric. And notice how I'm comparing it to speakers like the Sonos Fabric Electromotor 3s, Totem Tribe Towers, Meta Version 2s, and even Wilson Audio. I'm comparing to speakers that cost heaps above the price point of these speakers. And I'm not going to compare it to speakers like the Picard or any other speakers like the KEF or anything like that, because I am totally biased. Because the type of sound this speaker projects is the exact sound up my alley. It is my preference. It is just so good that I would just say this speaker is better than anything I've heard in the $2,000 price range. Not just saying that. It is the best speaker I have heard in the $2,000 price range. It competes with speakers that I'm looking to buy currently for $10,000, $15,000. Currently. So am I going to buy those speakers? Like the Sonos Fabric Electromotor 3s? I don't know anymore. After hearing these speakers, I am not certain anymore. And that humbles me. At the same time, it makes me question my sanity. And yes, the Sonos Fabrics, Wilson Audios, better craftsmanship, better build, better looking, better materials. Sure, but at the end of the day, the sound of these speakers compete. And it baffles me as to why, or I don't know. But these speakers, to me, sound that amazing. All I wanted in life was a speaker that sounds like this, that looks better than this. That's all I was asking for. Because let's face it, these speakers, to some rooms, to some people, will be pleasing. But to me, it gives me that vintage vibe. Like if I walk into a room and saw a speaker like this, it gives me like that vintage vibe. It's vintage. It's vintage. It looks too vintage for me to just Why? Again, just my personal dilemmas. Just don't worry about it. But coming back to these speakers, I have to say, don't be afraid to toe them a little bit more in. Because I found that towing these speakers in gives you, because they have great off-axis response again, great soundstage, not much sacrificing soundstage there by towing these speakers in. It's a matter of how much frequency, high frequency you want. Again, using the dial and the toe in to really nail that. And also, it gives you a very focused imaging down in the middle of your room. So I would say sit a little bit farther back because it gives you more bass output and that girth and that sound dimensionality. So don't form an exact triangle. I found that moving yourself a little bit back, a little bit more than the space between your two speakers is the best way to go. So play around with the placement. And for amplification, I've tried a lot of different amplification from class D to class A, B, and class A tube amplifiers, and I found that they all work phenomenally. Now, depending on your room size, obviously, you would want more power as bigger your room is. As your room grows, or bigger, you get the point. Big rooms need more power. But what is the best type of amplification for this speaker? Well, I found that from the various amplifications that I've tried, the Thalo from Dana Frips is the one to go. Now this is a very, to me, review coming soon, so I won't spoil it too much, but it's more of a girthy, muscular sounding amplifier and with a good balance of high frequency. So the word I would look for in an amplifier is muscular. Anything that has muscular warmth, that kind of word associated with it, that's probably the amplification that you want to pair up with these speakers. Because while these speakers are not too picky with amplification that has the tone that's muscular or has the tendency to be muscular in the bass region, will give you a little bit more bass output and also control the bass very, very well in a sealed enclosure to give you that full experience. So to me, the Dana Frips Thalo was a phenomenal match with these speakers, and they're about the ballpark of what I would use with these speakers in terms of the price range as well. However, if you're looking for something a little bit more affordable, I tried it with the Iota VX stack as well, the SA3 and the PA3, and that worked phenomenally well as well. I mean, it had the warmth and muscular sound that I was looking for. It had everything, but I found the Thalo to just have more of a synergy and coherency within the frequency ranges, just a little bit more better control, but and better noise floor. But you know what, the Iota VX was fantastic as well, especially for the price. So that's my recommendations for this speaker in terms of amplification. I have really nothing else more to say other than that this speaker is freaking DEBAK.